Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Don Falgout.
And I am your other host, Stephen Falgu. Get Recc'd is our occasional podcast where every week I recommend something to Don and they recommend something to me. And this is the first time we're recording this specific episode.
Yeah, it's never been done before. What you're witnessing right now is the first in history, the very first Get Recc'd number 81 of all time.
Which, really, if you think about it, all of the podcast episodes that we record are the first of their kind in history.
Yeah, which in a way means that we are 81-time world record holders.
That is true. And also, we are trendsetters. We are creating and setting the future. We are going to be in the annals of history as people who created podcasts that were uniquely its own thing.
Yes, with a combination of letters in the title, which were entirely unique each time. They had never been spelled out in that way ever before.
Yes, correct.
So,
And you're talking about our title of our podcast, right?
well,
It changes every
yes,
time, which is crazy.
exactly. Well,
It's very subtle. It's very subtle. I don't know if any of the viewers have noticed that every episode we actually have a different title of the podcast.
It's funny that you said that right as I was fixing the Twitch title, which said Get Rec. So I had made a mistake there. But it wasn't a mistake.
Exactly.
It was just one of the many hidden secrets. And speaking of Twitch, this is our very first time ever streaming Get Recc'd to Twitch. We have moved over to Twitch, and I should briefly mention this.
I would make a joke, like I would say something like poggers, but I would never make that joke on this podcast of episode 81.
Unfunny and unoriginal. There would just be no reason to.
Correct.
And I might say something like one of the other Twitch emotes, but I wouldn't do that,
exactly,
which is why I didn't say it. So anyway, we're on Twitch now. We used to stream to YouTube on the Casting404 YouTube channel, but now we will stream on the Twitch channel Casting_404. This goes, we were listening on any other platform. And anyway, I don't know where the VODs are going to go for now, but we are hoping to eventually get a Get Recc'd YouTube channel to post these VODs to. They may not go up to the YouTube channel, but they will be saved on this Twitch channel as highlights. So if you ever wish to re-listen, aside from Castbox, we will be the highlights will be saved on this Twitch channel. So that's going to be a little bit of a different thing going forward, but I think it'll be kind of nice to stream on Twitch, of course, for the first time ever. Right now, you're witnessing history, and the next time it will be the second time ever, but it will be the second time ever streaming Get Recc'd to Twitch. So you get to be here for history every other week.
Yes, Twitch has never seen anything like this. We're breaking new ground.
Well, with that said, let's break some more new ground and hop into what I recommended to you last time, Stephen.
Yes, sounds good.
I recommended to Stephen last time was the fourth album by Arizonan band, folk punk band, AJJ. This was their fourth album and also their longest at the time. I think longest to date. Yeah, longest to date. And it showed them working in a whole bunch of extra styles that they'd never worked in before. And that's all I'll say about that before tossing it over to Steven to discuss this recommendation on Get Recc'd number 81. First time on Twitch ever.
Right, and what I was going to say last time, and by last time I mean this current time because we've never tried to record this episode before, was that I did not know anything about this band, and yet when I listened to them, I knew they were from Arizona because they made some very specific Arizona references. Things that maybe people wouldn't be familiar with, such as the Phoenix Suns. They're a small indie group of basketball players. But the other one was Bookman's, the secondhand store that is very Arizona specific.
I live
I
in
was hoping.
Arizona, and I don't know what Bookman's is, so
Oh, well,
that tells you.
wow. Okay, maybe it was just Tucson because
Oh,
there are so many of them in Tucson. Um, but what I will say is, I was hoping for more Peter Piper pizza references. They
don't
didn't talk about Peter Piper
don't
pizza
you
enough.
fucking tell me that Peter Piper Pizza is Arizona exclusive. Is that true?
It is a Peter Piper pizza of Arizona, which got bought out by Chuck E. Cheese, unfortunately, or Showbiz Entertainment. But yes, it is
Wow.
a very Arizona specific chain. Or PF Chang's. They didn't talk about PF Chang's or PetSmart, which are headquartered in Arizona. So I just wanted to bring that up as a point of criticism. Next time, they could go harder on the Arizona references.
More reference more headquarters of various chain
Yes,
restaurants which are
please,
located in
please reference
Arizona.
more corporate headquarters in your music. That's all I have to say about music in general. Is they don't reference enough cities that have corporate headquarters. But what they did reference was the Cranberries and Michael Jordan, and I appreciated those. I'll say what I really liked about the band is that they have such a unique flavor. I feel like I've definitely heard things that are similar to what was being portrayed here, but they were so uniquely themselves in this album, and it really flowed through the entire time. They played around with not genre necessarily, but rhythm and maybe style, I would say, more than anything, where a lot of tracks felt very indie, some felt very folk, some felt very punk, and a little bit of rock in there as well, and it all meshed and was so cohesive. It really told a narrative throughout the album that I enjoyed a lot, and I feel like that narrative really kind of showed itself from track to track. I mean, the whole thing starts with talking about the Michael Jordan of drunk driving, which is just what a concept. And it doesn't really let you take a break from there. I think that there's not an overt comedy, like this is not a comedy album. However, there's kind of this um like undertone of comedy that I actually enjoyed quite a lot as well. It was like an sort of like an ironic style of comedy where again this is not a comedic album, but there were like the things that were discussed in such a way that was like they were both really great allegory and analogy, and they were also just kind of like inherently hilarious when you thought about them.
Yeah, the band has a very strong sense of humor, which helps a lot because their lyrical topics are very depressing. But listening to their music tends to not be very depressing. And it's just because Sean's lyrics are really funny and also really witty and self-referential, self-deprecating, but like um really a whole bunch of things. It's impossible like they just do such a great job blending moods and tones lyrically. And another thing I really like is there are a lot of references on the album, as you mentioned, like a lot of references just kind of thrown out left and right to various things. And the whole lyrical style is sort of like that. There's a lot of tangents that Sean goes on lyrically. Um, but always by the end of the track, there's some kind of connection. Although, that's what I would say about AJJ's music as a whole. But on this record, there are some like very topically concise tracks. Michael Jordan of Drunk Driving is a great example because that song is 20 seconds long, and it's just like a 4 line verse, but it is a very very powerful verse with just I don't even know how many words, probably not even 50. Um, and other songs jump around a lot, but you always get that idea. I mean, I there's a couple themes, but really just a lot of self hatred all over the record, and just like fear, and then some political themes as well. But all of that is projected inward a lot of the time. And so, again, like, despite all of that, and it is a very, very dark record with some very profoundly sad moments, but you don't ever come away from it feeling super sad. At least I don't. Because, like Steven mentioned, there is just so much comedy in it. And it's funny. Like, a lot of the lines are pretty funny.
Yeah, I was gonna echo. There's a depression and a melancholy to the entire thing, but the way that those emotions are expressed throughout the album, you never like the album itself does not make you feel those things. Melancholic or depressive, I guess. Have depression. To be depressed. It's all just I would never call the album uplifting, but it sonically is very energetic and energizing, and I feel like that really helps the album throughout the entire runtime, which isn't that long of an album, even if this may be their longest
It's
album.
long by their standards. Most of their albums are like under 30.
Mm-hmm. But it never felt like it overstayed any welcome. I think that this album really hooked me from the beginning, and then I was just like along for the ride, and I really enjoyed everything here. I mean, I could list them off, but I feel like so many of the tracks here are really great, and they each kind of bring their own thing to what I feel like is a very cohesive and kind of encapsulated and concise record. But I mean, track one we just talked about, but Get to the Magi 2, um, now that we're on Twitch, I don't want to TOS us, so there are some other songs about the devil that are pretty good.
I'm
And
pretty sure you could say. Well,
Freebird is great. There's just so many, and I'm talking about Freebird by, of course, Leonard Skinner.
yeah.
I just wanted to mention that song is great.
And there's also Zombie by the Cranberries.
Yeah, Zombie by the Cranberries is a great song as well. So yeah, there's just so much here that I really enjoyed. I think that this feels like, of all the albums that we've listened to on the podcast, this feels like one of the most just kind of streamlined and like fundamentally and technically just really good albums, like from start to finish. It hit all the right notes for me. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, and it helps that the track listing, is brisk, which is the one thing. Like, despite the fact that this is like almost double the length of a lot of their usual projects, they carry over the same just great flow, even just with the lengths of the tracks. Very few songs get over 4 minutes, and the ones that do justify it. But because there's so many, because they explore so many different aspects of their sound with different tracks, some tracks being like distinctly folk songs, other ones being distinctly punk songs, and a few other things here and there, they're able to really balance those two super well. Particularly in the first half of the record, I feel like the change ups between the slower tracks and the punk tracks is fantastic. It just rolls through these songs so that even the slower moments, they don't slow the album down. They just break it up a little bit. In the second half, I think it does a slightly weaker job of that, but it still works really well. There's just like, it's a pretty varied album, but it makes itself feel even more varied than it is just because of how well the contrast is done between the different songs, which is something that, compared to some other albums of theirs, I think like Knife Man does super super well. And the only other notes I wanted to make were just mentioning some of the tracks which I really really like. There's a lot of tracks that I really really like, but I love Gift of the Magi 2 is a bop. Backpack I really like, because Backpack is like probably the most depressing moment, but also it's just like really violent and graphic. It's very shocking, and I like that about it. Distance is just a great song about long distance relationships, which I vibe with. Hate Rain on Me is like a fucking anthem. And I mean, there's more that I could mention, but a lot of highlights and really no weak tracks, despite the fact that they really pushed themselves to make a much longer track list than they normally did. Like, it's still consistent as hell.
I don't know if this was a conscious decision, but I do like that from a meta perspective, the song Freebird is not the longest track on the album. I think that's funny. And I don't know if that was a conscious decision by them, but it makes me smile.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we probably can wrap it up. Because unless you have more
Yeah.
to say, I would like to suggest something when we wrap up albums. I think it would be cute if we added like a list of our favorite tracks from the record.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, my wrap up review is that I really enjoyed this a lot. I think that there's so much really great here. And I listened to it a few times as I usually do when we recommend an album. And each time I tried to pay like more and more attention to the lyrics. And there's just so much to unpack there as well that just makes um, continual listens really, really great. So I think my favorite tracks are the Michael Jordan of Drunk Driving, Gift of the Magi 2, and Hate Rain on Me. And I give this 9.5 Peter Piper pizzas out of 10 cacti.
10 Saworos.
10 saguaro cacti.
Do you recommend it?
I do recommend it, especially if you've ever been to a Bookman's before.
Which I have not. So I should have really never listened to this one.
All right, well, then you probably shouldn't listen to it, actually.
um, yeah, no, I love this record. It's not my favorite AJJ album. That would be People Who Can Eat People Are the Luckiest People in the World. That would be my favorite. But Knife Man comes in a close second. And I think that Knife Man just stands head and shoulders above the rest of their discography, just in terms of ambition, because it's a very ambitious record for them. Um, it's a pretty ambitious record in general, but especially for them. And it still carries over all the great personality and witticisms that their previous work did, as well as a little bit of the edge. It's got a little bit of edge to it, but it also just really brings the songs. Like, the songwriting is great. It's not just a bunch of genre experiments; they all pan out. Um, my favorite tracks are Michael Jordan of Drunk Driving, Gift of the Magi 2, Backpack, Distance, Hate Rain on Me, and People 2, Still People In, and Big Bird. And give this album a 9 as well. And I very much recommend it. And I do think it's a pretty good starter record for the band. This or the other one I mentioned, both be great. But this record gives you a really good idea of everything that they can do. And I think that's what makes it really cool. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, maybe we should move into what Steven recommended to me last time, if you'd like to get us off with that, Steven.
Yes, last time I recommended to you the board game Lost Ruins of Arnak. Lost Ruins of Arnak was a 2020 release by Czech Game. I believe they're called Czech Game Edition. Yeah, Czech's Game Edition. It was developed by a husband and wife team. The concept of the game is you are an explorer going to the lost ruin and island of Arnak. And it is a competitive game where you are trying to gather the most victory points through a variety of ways, such as researching and writing in your journal about what you find, gaining resources, and doing some light deck building. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Don, to talk about Lost Ruins of Arnak. But one last little disclaimer, we actually played Lost Ruins of Arnak on Tabletop Simulator. Tabletop Simulator has a scripted mod which allowed us to play digitally. So that is how we played. And those VODs are actually on this Twitch channel We played both the base game and then we also tried out the expansion, which I believe the expansion came out last year in 2021.
Yes, we did play this on stream, so you got to see me learn this game, course of 2 streams. And that's what I wanted to start with, actually, was the...
And become a professional.
That's true. Well, I lost
You
both
now get
games.
paid
Well,
to play it
I've not
in
made any money
competitive
off of that,
tournaments.
having lost all of my games. But, you know, I really liked... Well, I was surprised. This is the thing I want to say. I was really surprised by how quickly I learned the game. Because I think, like a lot of like modern tabletop games that I've played, because Steven's shown them to me. This is not my medium. This is Steven's. But like a lot of the modern tabletop games that I've played with him, it's very complicated to explain. And just in general, it's fairly complicated. There are a lot of things that are in it. And I'd imagine one read through a rule book would not teach you how to play, I think, especially if, well, at least I should say, if you're not familiar with tabletop too much, like I am. So just hearing the rules, I was just like, what the hell? But what I really liked was that despite all the like little superfluous details, well, nothing superfluous, but all the stuff, there's a lot of stuff. Despite all the stuff that's in it, the game plays fairly intuitively. Each time I would play, there was a lot to consider, but there were really only 3 or 4 things that really needed to be on my mind. Different options of things I could do, see if they were possible. There's a lot of stuff for sure, but your options are nicely limited in a way that allows you to like keep track of it all every time it's your turn, which I really liked. Also, just the overall layout of the board game. It's not very readable at first, but pretty much as soon as you grab what you're trying to do in the game, understand it, the layout of the board is really smart. And it might be minor, but it does add a lot. And I thought that even just like the placement of where certain cards were on the board, and where the locations were and where the research path was, everything was very readable as soon as you understood what it all meant. And that didn't take too long. So that's maybe one of my biggest compliments about the game, was that, it felt like there was a lot to consider, and it felt like the learning curve for the game wasn't too steep despite that. It was pretty easy to get into with just like one practice round. You get it. And then from there, though, there's a lot of depth, and the options you have to consider are just complicated enough to make it so that I can imagine every game would play pretty differently. And I thought the balance of those things was really impressive.
Yeah, what I'll say about it is there are a lot of things, but from every time I've taught the game or played the game with people, once you get through a couple turns, the game plays over 5 rounds, which are comprised of an X number of turns until all players pass. Once you get through a couple turns, people pretty quickly just pick it up. And to your point, the board is laid out in an intuitive manner where you have sites that you can go to get resources. You have your basic sites, which cost you nothing. Then on top of that, you have your level 1 sites, which cost you a little more, and then your level 2 sites, which cost you the most. And then you have really the main focus of the game, which is always on the right side of the board. And it's this ladder that you're climbing, and you're trying to race to get to the top first. And once people play a few rounds, you're like, okay, I get it. And then to your point, I feel like what's so great about this game is there's so much depth and complexity in the strategy of where do I need to go? What do I need to get? all in favor of one singularly focused objective, basically, which is climbing up that ladder. And there's some really cool stuff you can do, like especially as you get into the later rounds. What I really enjoy about the game is almost becomes a puzzle game, honestly, more than anything else. You're trying to puzzle out, okay, where can I go to get some resources that I might be able to turn into something else, such as buying a card or buying an artifact that can get me the resources I need to advance up the ladder. And basically throughout, the entire round, can I get down to no resources by, efficiently moving my pieces around and getting the right resources to climb up the ladder and buying cards and those sorts of things. It really makes it, especially as I mentioned in later rounds, makes for a lot of strategy, a lot of like planning ahead, and sort of this nice puzzle aspect that I enjoy quite a lot.
Yeah, and then I wanted to go from there into the concept, which was another thing that was just really cool. I think that it's basically like Indiana Jones, but off-brand. That's it. I mean, I guess you could say like Uncharted or something, which in a way is also off-brand Indiana Jones. So whatever. It's like an adventurer, like you're an archaeologist explorer, and you're going to like ancient ruins and stuff. Um, and it's fun. It's different, and I found that for the most part, the gameplay really complemented that. The actual things that you do, they feel like things you would do if you're like the leader of an expedition to a lost temple. And what's fun is the guardians, because that's another Indiana Jonesy thing. It's like when you get to the temple, there's something that's protecting it. And in this case, they're always like large beasts which you have to take down and then tame, I guess, because they become a part of your crew. I don't know, but what was fun was because Steven and I were playing this on stream and trying to make it entertaining for viewers, we had to lightly role play the characters. Um, and I feel like that's part of what you're supposed to do. It's very much built to help you, like, imagine the scenarios and the situations that are going on in a really creative and fun way. It's a bit more so than, again, other modern tabletop games I've played, which, I mean, every game has to have a concept. You're doing something, but it's like sometimes you don't really get into the imagination of it. You just play the game. I feel like this one did a good job capturing your imagination and just playing really fun off of that.
Yeah, and I feel like the more I play it, the more I pick up on a lot of really cool little thematic elements. You could certainly look at this game and abstract it, like kind of get into a sense of where you're just playing, but I do agree there is a lot that they've added that really create and kind of immerse you in this concept of being an explorer of a lost ruin. So as an example, like I was just playing the last time I played, I noticed one of the cards is it's a tiger statue with only one ruby in its eye. It's missing a ruby. So the actual card itself, you play a ruby, kind of simulating you're filling in the other eye. And then the tiger statue gives you arrowhead and tablets. So it's kind of like thinking back to that kind of Indiana Jones, like filling in that magic slot to open up a hidden passageway sort of thing. And as I play it more, I'm finding more and more of those little elements that are really interesting and really kind of immerse you in that concept.
Yeah, and I think the art does a good job with that as well, since you mentioned that. I mean, like the art of the board and everything is really nice. Has a good appearance, pretty solid aesthetic, and it helps get you into character. And I think all that combines together into one of the more engaging tabletop experiences I've had playing with you. I think a lot of these games, because there's a lot of brain power that it takes, and not in the you need to do a bunch of math or whatever, but it feels like it's really it's capturing your imagination, getting you into the world, and simultaneously really challenging your strategic capabilities, because there's definitely a lot of strategizing here, and I didn't get to experience too much of that. I played we played 2 games of this, maybe 3, I can't remember. And anyway, just from that, it's difficult to learn the game so well that I was like thinking 5 moves ahead, but I can tell it's the kind of thing where you totally can do that. The more that you play the game, the more you can really start to consider, like, what's going to be your path, not just for this turn, but what is your end goal by the end of this round? And what do you want to do every turn to complement that end goal? And that was the kind of thinking I started to get towards the end of the last game that we played, which I might as well go into this now, was the expansion. We added the expansion onto it, and the expansion for Lost Ruins of Arnak was also really cool. I didn't get to play enough of it to experience all the different characters, but it adds like a character element. So you take on a character with character specific abilities, which just adds a whole nother layer of complication to things. But much like the base game, I found that even this additional element to complicate the game didn't make it confusing. It just added another host of options you had, which, I wouldn't encourage anybody to start the game for their first time playing with it because you just add more things to learn. But if you already get the base game, I thought it was a pretty natural extension of that. And that was also really cool.
Yeah, what I'll mention about the expansion is I feel like a lot of times with board game expansions, they add that extra element and you have to build to it. You just mentioned you wouldn't necessarily start by showing someone Lost Ruins of Arnak with the expedition leaders, which, as you mentioned, adds specific player powers and everyone plays kind of asymmetrically because each player power is different. However, what I'll say about Lost Ruins Arnak to its benefit is a lot of times when that happens, it's like, okay, well, basically this means I'm never getting the expansion to the table because unless I play with people who have played a lot, I'm not going to start by teaching people with the expansion. But what's so great about Lost Ruins of Arnak is I really enjoy playing it both ways. And I think actually playing it with the expedition leaders and playing it without the expedition leaders each have their own set of different flavor and strategy, where I don't mind playing this game as any combination, either just straight base game where everyone is kind of very simplified, or with the expedition leaders, which adds that kind of fun little extra element. The other thing that the expansion adds, and this is kind of harder to ascertain from the way that we played it, but the other expansion adds new research boards. So as you go, as I mentioned, there's like kind of a race ladder. The new expansion adds new boards of those, which are all very interesting and different and don't really add any complexity. They just kind of change what you're doing as you go up the board. And they add new cards and such, but again, those don't really change anything. I actually just integrated all of that stuff into the base game because it doesn't really add any different elements or anything. It's just more stuff, basically. Um, but what I'll mention about the expansion is it feels like one of those expansions where it's not imperative. There are definitely board games where it's like, okay, if you don't have the expansion and if you're not playing with the expansion, then you might as well not play it anymore, sort of a thing. This feels like just a really natural and fun complement in addition to what's already a really great game, and you can play it in any way. And I don't think the expansion is like a necessary addition to, make the game playable. I think that the game is really fun no matter how you play it.
Yeah, the final thing that I wanted to mention was regarding the length of the game. Um, might be an easily overlooked aspect, but I really liked the limit imposed by 5 rounds. Now, I'll ask you because I don't know this. Are you allowed to adjust the number of rounds?
No.
Okay, so it's 5 rounds every time. Yeah, well, and that's
I mean, I guess theoretically you could house rules it, like you could just
yeah,
keep playing, but
yeah.
no, it's always 5.
Right, okay. Yeah, well, I liked that a lot. And I liked that it was pretty limiting, I will say, but in a good way. I think like as you get to like round 4 and 5, it starts to rush you in a way that makes the strategizing change. I guess that's natural when something's coming to its conclusion. You're going to have to change your strategy a little if you're behind. But you can get behind very quickly, and there's only 5 rounds, so there's not a ton of time in the game to catch up if you are behind, which forces you to think differently. Now, the reason I'm speaking like this is because I was behind the whole time, because Steven kind of kicked my ass for a lot of this, but that put me in an interesting position, and I found that it was like, okay, so then what can I do? And the thing is, like, I can't speak to how well the game allows you to catch up because I lost at the end both times, but there are a ton of options at your disposal to do that. there were like a ton of things I was having to consider about like, okay, so how can I gain some points here? And I would try things like buying items, which they come with their own points. I was trying things like, you know, trying to move up the research path in any way possible and just doing a bunch of like unique different things, trying to raise my victory points in addition to my resources and all of those kinds of things. And it just further proves how giving the players so many things to consider really adds to this game in a in the strategy of how you tackle it.
Yeah, and I think also, although rounds is limiting, I like the way that the rounds really ramp. Like the first couple of rounds, you don't have that much at your disposal, so the rounds play pretty quick. But then as you get into those later rounds, now there are more sites to visit. You might have more cards in your deck that allow you to do better things. So as you get into those later rounds, the rounds go longer than they did before, and that's a nice natural ramp up. And also, what I meant, like to kind of to our earlier point, it also really helps with new players. Like in those first rounds, the players, who are new may not do that much and might not feel like they have accomplished that much, but that's okay because, what I always say when I'm teaching the game is as the rounds go on and you understand the game more, the game is going to get a little longer for you. So as you kind of understand it even naturally on your first play, as you get into the later rounds, there's kind of that longer length in a round where you're doing more stuff. And more stuff is always fun.
Very well.
The last thing I wanted to mention before we maybe wrap up is what I find really interesting about this game actually is every time first of all, you have to think differently in this game because this game does have a lot of different mechanics that are propagated across board gaming. There's a deck building aspect, there's kind of a worker placement, or in this case, archaeologist placement sort of aspect, there's a racing aspect, but this game is none of those things, if that makes sense. Like, this game is not a deck builder. Like, you really can't play this as kind of a traditional deck builder. Certainly, you're buying cards and you're advancing your deck, but because the game only plays over 5 rounds, you're not ever getting, building a deck where, like, now you have this super powerful deck. You're really only playing maybe a card you bought in the first or second round, maybe like 2 times, 3 if you have a really thin deck, but it's not necessarily that. You only have 2 archaeologists, so it's not really kind of a worker placement game. It's like this really nice combination and streamlining of all of those things into a nice cohesive little package. The other thing that I'll mention about this game, which I find is really interesting, is every time I play this game, I just kind of have fun playing it, and everyone at the table is the same, where although it's a competitive game, a lot of times when I'm playing this game, it almost becomes cooperative. Like, literally every play I've had of Lost Ruins of Arnak, people are helping each other at the table trying to puzzle out their turns. Or, like, looking at the table for everyone else and being like, oh, did you see this? Because this thing could really help you. Or, oh, you forgot you have an idol on your board, which you can use to get more resources that could help you. Even though it is competitive, it always ends up being cooperative, which is kind of interesting. I've never experienced that really with any board game but this one.
I bet that's probably just because of how many things there are in the game. There's so much to consider and see that like everybody's excited to point out that they noticed something,
Yeah.
like they noticed a play that you could make. And
Which is really fun because there are a lot of, you mentioned it, but there's so many strategic choices and so many things going on that there are a lot of really cool, interesting little things that you can pick up on to have pretty neat little plays. Especially as you pay more and more attention to the artifacts, which can be very powerful ways to get resources and things like that.
well, I'm ready to wrap it up if you are.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, yeah. So first time reviewing a tabletop experience, although we had reviewed a legendary whatever the hell, legendary DXP. Is that what it was called? Anyway, that was
I think
kind
so.
of yeah, that was kind of a middle ground because I played it as a video game version of it. But this, even though it was on Tabletop Simulator, that I feel like that mostly counts. Um, we got the experience of playing it tabletop, and that was a unique thing to not only just try to learn and enjoy the board game, but also to try to be critical of it positively or negatively, just to like analyze the qualities of it. And it gave me more appreciation for this one in particular, because I feel like of any to start doing that for, this was a really good one, because there's so much that's happening in it. There's so much that's like baked into it. It just really got me considering, like, wow, that was pretty clever. That was pretty unique. That was pretty interesting. That was pretty creative that they included that. And really, I have nothing but positive things to say about the game. Maybe like maybe if I really dug for it, I could find things I didn't like. Although I don't even know if I played enough to really pick out those nitpicks. Um, because nothing glaring stood out. It was immersive and you know, creative and strategic, and it was fun. It was a good, well-made game. So God, scoring a board game, I don't really have things to compare it to. It usually helps me to think like, well, what of this medium would I think is like a 10 and what would be like a 0, and then kind of figure it out from there. But this is the first time I've ever thought of putting a number to a board game, so I'll just throw something out.
Well, is it better or worse than
Is
Monopoly?
it better? What? Because that's the 5? Like Monopoly's the 5 level, and it gets worse or better than that? Because if I thought about it from that perspective, that does kind of help, I guess. Um, I'd probably give it an 8 for now, and with room to grow, not shrink. It's at least that, because I thought it was a great board game. I know I said I had no problems, but that doesn't necessarily mean it blew my mind. I don't if a board game can even do that. Again, I'm struggling, but it was really well rounded, really fun. I would definitely want to play it again. I don't know if it would be my first choice with other like tabletop stuff I've played, but it would be up there for sure. So I really liked it, and I'd recommend it. I mean, it's harder to get your hands on than probably anything else we generally recommend, just by nature of it being tabletop. But I'm sure you could just order it online if you really wanted to play it. And I think if you have enough people and you're willing to, be the person to have to learn the rules, or if you have someone who can show it to you, you can play it. You can play it with who already knows the game. I think it's a lot of fun, and I would recommend it.
One thing I had forgotten to mention, so I'll mention it here. Player count. So we played at 2. The game scales up to 4 and all the way down to 1. I've played at every player count, and it is a ton of fun every time. And the game kind of self-balances based on like how many people can go to sites and such. There are some ways that it handles the additional or decreased player count, and each player count I found is really enjoyable. Obviously, the more players you have, the longer it takes. I'd say like all the way up to 4. The game's probably still 2 hours, which honestly for a tabletop game or a game in the hobby is not that bad comparatively. But it could go up to 2 hours. What I will say about the game is I really enjoy this game as a solo experience. This game is really great solo. There's a deck of cards that represents an AI that you're competing against, and the game almost becomes a puzzle even more than it usually is. And they even created a solo campaign. And each of the campaign missions really changes things up in a really interesting and unique way. I won't spoil it for anyone, but if you're looking for a solo board game, I think that this is a great pickup. It's really fun solo as well. This game on Board Game Geek, which is kind of the IMDb, I guess, equivalent of board games, I've given a 10. I really enjoy this game a lot. It's become one of my favorites for sure. Will it stay as a 10? I don't know. I definitely have some board game rating inflation right now, so it might not be a true 10 for me over time, but every time I play this, I just have a ton of fun. So I definitely recommend this one. This one is on, I think it's called like Boardlandia or something. No, Board Game Arena, which if you pay a few dollars for premium, you can play a digital version of this. As we mentioned, Dawn and I actually played this on Tabletop Sim, and there are a couple of scripted mods which kind of handle all the cleanup and everything for you. So that's another great way if you were looking to play this digitally. But I really enjoyed the component and quality of the actual physical board game. My one big gripe, and this is something very unique to board games, there is no insert at all for this game. It didn't even come with enough bags to really hold everything. So everything just kind of like ends up in an empty box, and it is a nightmare to set up and tear down. So luckily I had a lot of like extra baggies and Sharpies and stuff to where now I've kind of organized it all in the box, but I really wish there was something that this came with, even if it was like a plastic insert, just to hold the things that the game comes with, because otherwise it is just a disaster in there. But I definitely recommend it.
Sweet. Well, before we move into our recommendations, I would like to say that we should open Get Recc'd up to tabletop stuff, because I feel like, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I feel like that's Steven's area of expertise. Maybe more so than anything else.
I think that's probably true, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it would be that would be really unique, and also it would help me learn stuff. And tabletop sim is a good way for us to play it, and on stream. So just a thought. But anyway, another first today on Get Recc'd number 81. Again, the first Get Recc'd number 81. This is also the first board game. Well, sort of ish on Get Recc'd. But it is the first board game on Get Recc'd number 81. So
yeah, I think you could call this podcast episode the Michael Jordan of episode 81s.
Right. Okay, let's move into recommendations. So, because I went first, I'll recommend to Steven first. Now, I'm going to do another first here on Get Recc'd, because today's all about firsts. And we're going to split up a recommendation over the course of multiple episodes. I believe 5. 5 Get Recc'd episodes. My recommendation will stretch through. So I'm recommending an entire series. It is both a television series and also a film. That is Neon Genesis Evangelion. This is a 26 episode anime from 1990 something. I want to say 1997, maybe 1996. I don't know. Anyway, it's a series about a few teenagers being forced to pilot mechs, and defeating these monsters known as angels. This series is 26 episodes and then a film, End of Evangelion. The film was essentially a replacement for the final 2 episodes of the series, which were heavily impacted by budget restraints. The series director, Hideki Anno, and the studio was Gainax and Tatsunoko. Anyway, we will split it up by doing, I think 26 divided by 4 is 6.5. So we'll do 3 episodes with 6 episodes and 1 episode with, I guess, 7, or however the hell we can make it work. And then the ending with the film End of Evangelion. So for this episode, I'm specifically recommending episodes 1 through 6. You can watch it on Netflix, subtitled. Definitely watch it subtitled, because I don't want to spend any time talking about the dub voice acting. I just feel like that's unnecessary and kind of irrelevant. And that is my recommendation.
I could also just watch 6.5 episodes every time.
You could.
That's oh, well, gotta end the episode. We're halfway done.
That's true. Yeah.
I don't know if you're gonna believe this, but I've never seen it, so I'm excited to go on this journey.
Oh, you know what? Actually, first of all, that's awesome. And secondly, I think at the halfway point of every episode, it's distinctly marked in the episode. I think, if I remember right, at the halfway point of every episode, it cuts to black and then it shows the title of the episode. I'm pretty sure that's the case. So I'm not saying we should actually do this, but it would be possible to do 6.5 episodes every time. Anyway, we'll stick to 6, at least for now.
Okay, well, my recommendation for you is also a first for the podcast.
Yeah, because it's going fucking wild today.
Because it is the first time that I'm recommending Lizzo. So I'm recommending I'm recommending the album "'Cause I Love You" by Lizzo. It was a 2019 release, kind of Lizzo's big release, honestly, where most of the singles came from. Lizzo's had a couple albums before and have had a couple albums since, but this was sort of like the big breakout album. So next time we will talk about "'Cause I Love You" by Lizzo.
All right, and that does it for today's first ever episode 81 of Get Recc'd podcast. The first ever episode aired on Twitch. The first ever episode where we reviewed Knife Man by AJJ. The first ever episode where we reviewed Lost Ruins of Arnak, which doubles as the first ever episode we have reviewed a board game specifically as a board game, as well as the first ever episode where I recommended to Steven a full series, which is the first ever episode where I recommended Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is also the first episode where Steven ever recommended Lizzo, and the first episode where he recommended the Lizzo album Because I Love You. And in addition to all of those things, it is the first of all of those as well for episode 81 of Get Recc'd. So today was a monumental moment in Get Recc'd history, as well as world history. Scholars will discuss this moment in the history books.
I hope everyone listening is looking forward to the second episode 81, episode 81-2, where we do this all again, the exact same episode for the second time.
Which, of course, that would be a first, because that would be the first time we've ever redone this episode 81, which, just yet another thing to add to the list.
We could get really meta, and I could recommend you an episode of Get Recc'd. A self-review.
Yes. Personally, Get Recc'd, I'd probably give it a 5. Wouldn't really recommend it.
Yeah, it's not that great, to be honest. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And although we joke about all our firsts, this is 100% our first episode on twitch.tv. Poggers in the chat. So thank you, everyone, for being here on Twitch. And as Dawn mentioned, this will be our new streaming home.
Yes, the home for the podcasts after the stream is still undecided, but for now, that will also be the Twitch channel. So just check my highlights if you ever want to re-listen to any of these, or if you miss one, you can always listen to it on the highlights. As for Castbox, I always say we're on Castbox, though I don't think I've uploaded an episode there in a while, and Castbox may not be our home forever. There are a lot of things we're looking into doing. I'll still mention that our episodes are on Castbox. And previous episodes were all on the Casting 404 YouTube channel. That's just Casting 404 with no underscore. I think that channel might be dead now, though. But if you do wish to go into our back catalog for this current moment, that's where you can do it, and also on Castbox. A lot of changes to come. I would assume at least somewhere in the next 10 episodes, we'll have something figured out for you. So sure to inform you of all of those things. And yeah, thank you for watching. And we appreciate
on the 10th episode 81.
Which will be the first 10th episode 81. We've been, guys, listen, big things. Okay. Anyway, thank you all for watching as always. And I think with all of that, those were our thoughts and those were our recommendations. Get Recc'd.